tapped the Witch of Hemlock Vale. The mist clung to the mountains surrounding Hemlock Vale like a shroud, obscuring the ancient forest that bordered the village on three sides. Within those woods, creatures moved that the villagers spoke of only in whispers. Beyond the last row of orderly fields, where cultivation surrendered to wilderness, a path wound upward, into the trees, eventually reaching a hill crowned with a dilapidated cottage that most villagers took pains to avoid. Inside that cottage, Lilith Moonshadow watched the village prepare for Harvest Festival. Through a wavering image suspended in air, conjured from water, moonlight, and blood, she observed the villagers' movements with cold silver eyes. 20 years had passed since she had walked among them, 20 years since the day they had taken everything from her. Tonight, that would change. "It's time, Mother," she whispered to the empty room. From the shadows, yellow eyes blinked in response, her familiars sensing her resolve. Tonight, I returned to them. Part 1. The Forsaken Daughter. Lily had been 17 when she first caught Thorn Blackwood's attention. The elder's son had come to her mother's cottage seeking treatment for a hunting wound. As her mother crushed herbs for a poultice, Lily had cleaned his gash with steady hands. "You've your mother's touch," he'd said, watching her work. "The plants speak to me as they do to her," Lily replied without thinking, then bit her lip. Such talk made villagers uneasy, but Thorn had only smiled. "What do they say about me?" "That you're strong but careless." She pressed the poultice to his wound. "The blackberry warned me you'd come today. Its thorns drew my blood this morning." Instead of fear, curiosity filled his eyes. "Can you teach me to hear them?" She couldn't, of course. The knowledge came from her bloodline, passed from mother to daughter for generations. But their conversations began that day, evolving from guarded exchanges to impassioned declarations as the seasons turned. By winter, they were meeting in secret, the elder's son and the midwife's daughter with the unusual silver eyes. "I'll break my betrothal," Thorn promised beneath an ancient oak, his breath visible in the cold air. "After the winter solstice celebrations, I'll tell my father I won't marry Alina." Lily touched his face. "Your father will never permit it." "Then we'll leave," he said simply. "Start anew in the southern towns." She believed him because she wanted to believe, because his touch made her feel both anchored and weightless, because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. But winter brought more than secret promises. A sickness swept through Hemlock Vale, affecting children first, fever, followed by labored breathing and a blue tinge to the lips. Lily and her mother worked tirelessly, creating tinctures and poultices that saved many, but couldn't save all. With each child's death, fearful glances turned their way. The whispers began. Perhaps the illness was unnatural. Perhaps someone had angered the old spirits. Perhaps the midwife and her strange-eyed daughter knew more than they revealed. When the elder's youngest granddaughter, Thorn's niece, succumbed to the blue fever, despite Lily's mother's ministrations, the whispers grew to murmurs. The elder, grief-stricken and seeking something to blame, discovered his son's secret relationship. Lily learned of the coming danger when Thorn himself appeared at her door before dawn. "They're coming," he said, his eyes wild. "My father, he knows about us. He says you've bewitched me." "Then tell him the truth," Lily insisted. "Tell them all the truth." But she saw it then, the hesitation, the calculation behind his eyes. "It's not that simple, Lily. He's convinced your mother's remedies spread the sickness rather than cure it. People are desperate for answers." "So you'll give them a convenient lie?" Her voice broke. "After everything you promised?" His gaze dropped. "I came to warn you. You should run, both of you." Before she could respond, before she could plead or rage or weep, he was gone, slipping away into the pre-dawn mist. They had barely finished packing essentials when the torches appeared on the path to their cottage. What followed haunted Lily's dreams for years afterward. The pounding at their door. Her mother pushing her toward the back window. "Run!" she whispered fiercely. "Live." But they broke through too quickly. Rough hands seized them both. In the village square, with the entire population of Hemlock Vale watching, the elder pronounced his judgment. "Witchcraft," he declared, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Dark magic that has poisoned our children." Lily searched desperately for Thorn among the faces. When she found him, standing at his father's right hand, his expression was carved from stone. The girl ensnared my son with unnatural charms, the elder continued, and now we see the terrible price of such congress, with darkness. Speak, she screamed at Thorn. Tell them. He stepped forward, and for a moment hope flared within her. Then he spoke, his voice steady and unfamiliar. She used strange potions, made me drink them when I visited for treatment. After that, I couldn't resist her call. I was bewitched. As the crowd's fury mounted, Lily felt something break inside her, not her heart, but something deeper, something that had been dormant her entire life. As they bound her mother to the hastily constructed pyre, that broken thing began to stir, unfurling like a night-blooming flower within her chest. "Mother!" she screamed as the torches touched the kindling. As flames consumed the only person who had ever truly loved her, something ignited within Lily as well. Power surged through her, ancient and terrible, responding to her grief and rage. The ropes binding her wrists blackened and fell away. The ground beneath the square trembled. Winds whipped suddenly through the village, extinguishing torches and throwing villagers to the ground. In the chaos, her eyes found Thorn's once more. Recognition passed between them. He saw what was happening, what she was becoming. Fear replaced the cold detachment in his eyes. Good, she thought, as she turned and fled toward the forest, arrows and stones following her retreat. Let him be afraid. Let them all be afraid. The girl who had been Lily died that day in the village square. The woman who ran into the ancient forest, her mother's screams echoing in her ears, called herself Lilith, and she vowed that one day she would return. Part 2. The Witch of the Woods. The forest accepted Lilith as one of its own. Perhaps it recognized the ancient power awakening in her blood, or perhaps it simply welcomed her hatred, so similar to the primordial emotions that pulsed beneath its soil. Either way, the trees parted to reveal paths where none had existed before, leading her deeper than any villager had ever ventured. For the first year, she merely survived. She ate what the forest provided, drank from hidden springs, and slept in the hollow of an enormous fallen tree. At night, she practiced the small magics her mother had taught her, calling birds to her hand, sensing which plants could heal and which could harm. But always, beneath these innocent workings, she felt the deeper power that had awakened in the village square, waiting like a predator in the shadows of her soul. In her second year of exile, she discovered the caves beneath the forest. Following a fox that seemed unusually interested in her movements, she found an opening hidden behind a waterfall. The cave system stretched for miles beneath the forest, its walls inscribed with symbols older than human settlement in the valley. It was there she found the book, its binding made from some material she couldn't identify, its pages filled with writing that shifted as she looked at it, sometimes resembling her mother's neat script, sometimes appearing as strange angular symbols. She couldn't read it at first, but she carried it back to her hollow tree and kept it with her as she slept. The dreams began that night. Dreams of women with her silver eyes, stretching back through countless generations. They taught her in her sleep how to draw power from the earth, how to communicate with the creatures of the forest, how to bend reality to her will. She woke each morning with new knowledge, her fingers tingling with potential. By her 5th year in exile, the forest had begun to change around her dwelling. The trees grew twisted, responding to her emotions. Flowers bloomed out of season. Animals brought her gifts, bright stones, unusual feathers, once even a silver bracelet that must have belonged to some unfortunate traveler. She built a cottage on the hill overlooking the village, using magic to raise the heavy stones. From there, she could watch Hemlock Vale through various scrying methods she had perfected. She saw Thorn marry his betrothed, saw him father 3 children, saw him gradually take on his father's responsibilities as the old man's health failed. Each glimpse of his contentment fed the darkness within her. Each happy moment he experienced was an arrow to her heart. The village prospered under his gradually increasing leadership. The fields yielded abundant harvests, trade routes to larger towns were established, new homes were built. Meanwhile, Lilith delved deeper into darker magics. She learned to command not just the small creatures of the forest, but its very essence. She communed with entities that existed between the worlds, trading portions of her humanity for knowledge. Her beauty remained, but changed. her silver eyes now sometimes flickering with shadows that had depth beyond the physical world. Her black hair growing past her waist with strands that occasionally moved of their own accord. On the 10th anniversary of her escape, she performed her first true sacrifice. The hunter had strayed too far into her woods, following a stag she had befriended. When he raised his bow, she stepped from behind a tree and let him see her in all her wild glory. His arrow faltered. His eyes widened. "Are you lost?" she asked, her voice unused to human speech after so long. You're the witch," he stammered, recognition dawning. He was one of the younger men who had been in the square that day, barely more than a boy then. "I am," she acknowledged, "and you're trespassing." When it was done, when she had extracted everything from him, his blood, his breath, his memories, his regrets, she felt the power of it surge through her. The forest responded, trees creaking and bending toward her like supplicants. The sacrifice taught her the true price and potential of her magic. It should have horrified her, but all she felt was the hollow satisfaction of stepping further away from the girl she had been, the girl who had loved and lost. In her 15th year of exile, she learned to change her appearance. It began with small alterations, the shade of her hair, the tone of her skin, but soon she could adopt entirely new forms. She practiced by venturing to distant villages, appearing as an old woman or a young man, testing her interactions with humans who knew nothing of her true nature. It was on one such excursion that she heard tales of Hemlock Vale's prosperity under their new elder. Thorn had fully assumed his father's position after the old man's death. The village had expanded with new buildings and a proper market square. Their herbal remedies, a bitter irony given her mother's fate, were renowned throughout the region. By her 20th year in the forest, Lilith's powers had reached their peak. She could call storms with a whispered word, could speak with the dead during the dark of the moon, could weave illusions so perfect that reality itself seemed uncertain in her presence. The book from the cave had yielded all its secrets, and she had supplemented its knowledge with grimoires and scrolls traded from dark entities. And still, the emptiness within her remained. All her power could not fill the void left by betrayal. All her magic could not erase the memory of her mother's screams. As the 20th anniversary of that terrible day approached, Lilith stood before her scrying pool and watched the village prepare for Harvest Festival. Through the water's surface, she observed Thorn directing the preparations. His hair now streaked with gray, his face lined but still handsome, his 3 children now adults themselves. One of his sons had Thorn's exact smile, she noticed with a pang. His daughter had his eyes. Enough, she told herself. She had waited long enough. Her power was at its zenith. The forest had taught her patience, the slow, inexorable patience of growing roots, cracking stone. Now the stone would shatter. Lilith spent 3 days preparing her disguise, not just a physical transformation, but layers of subtle magic that would cloud men's judgments and make women uneasy without knowing why. She created the beautiful stranger with careful precision, a woman similar enough to her true form that Thorn might feel the disquieting echo of recognition, but different enough that no one would immediately identify her as the girl who had fled 2 decades ago. When she was satisfied, she packed a small cart with remedies and trinkets, each imbued with minor enchantments that actually worked, throat soothers that eased winter coughs, love charms that created a mild attraction, luck tokens that bent probability ever so slightly in the bearer's favor, honest magic to establish trust. As she prepared to leave her forest sanctuary, her familiars gathered, the fox that had led her to the caves, the raven that brought her news from distant places, the ancient serpent that had taught her poisons. "Watch," she told them. "Remember, when I return, I will not be the same." The fox whined softly, as if in warning. "No." She agreed, stroking its russet fur. "There will be no turning back." Part 3. The Stranger at the Harvest Fair. Hemlock Vale had indeed prospered in her absence. As Lilith guided her small cart along the improved road into the village, she noted the changes. Stone buildings where wooden structures had stood, a proper inn rather than just a tavern, goods in the market square that must have come from far-off cities. The Harvest Festival was in full swing. Garlands of autumn flowers and wheat sheaves decorated the square where her mother had burned. Children ran laughing between stalls selling honey cakes and spiced cider. Musicians played near the new well at the center of the square, their merry tune drawing couples to dance. Lilith felt the villagers' gazes turn to her as she entered the square, curious, assessing, but not hostile. Her disguise held perfectly. To them, she appeared as a striking traveler with chestnut hair and unusual amber eyes, her beauty notable but not supernatural, her clothing fine enough to suggest success but not so luxurious as to inspire suspicion. "Welcome, traveler," called a portly man who appeared to be organizing the stall arrangements. "Have you come for the festival?" "Indeed," Lilith replied, her voice melody and smoke. "I've brought remedies and trinkets from the southern provinces. Might there be space for another vendor?" As the man, the innkeeper, she learned, helped her set up a small stall near the edge of the square, Lilith surveyed the crowd. Most faces were unfamiliar. The village had grown, with newcomers settled among the original families, but there, helping to raise a banner, was one of the men who had seized her mother. And across the square, supervising the musicians, was another who had thrown stones as she fled. She would remember them all. By midday, she had drawn considerable attention. Her remedies worked immediately, impressively, which generated word of mouth that brought customers. Men lingered at her stall, finding reasons to return, to ask questions about her travels, to seek recommendations for ailments both real and invented. Women purchased her goods but rarely stayed to chat, often pulling their husbands or brothers away with tight expressions. As the sun began to set, torches and lanterns were lit around the square. The music grew livelier, the dancing more energetic. Lilith watched it all with a pleasant smile that never reached her eyes, selling her wares and establishing her persona as a knowledgeable, mysterious traveler. "Your remedies are remarkable," said a voice that sent ice through her veins despite 20 years of preparation. Thorn Blackwood stood before her stall, examining a small vial of headache cure. He had aged well, his face lined with the evidence of laughter rather than hardship. Authority sat comfortably on his shoulders. "Elder Blackwood," she said, proud that her voice remained steady, "I'm honored by your interest." "News travels quickly in a festival," he replied with an easy smile. "Half my village seems to have been miraculously cured of various complaints since your arrival." "Hardly miracles," she demurred, "simply good herbcraft." A flicker of something, not quite recognition, but a shadow of memory, passed over his face. "You have knowledge of herbs, then?" "Among other things." She held his gaze, allowing the slightest hint of her power to surface in her eyes. He stared a moment too long before shaking his head slightly. "You must dine at my table tonight," he said. "We're always eager to learn from travelers with specialized knowledge." "I wouldn't want to impose." "Not at all." His smile returned. "My children will be there. My daughter Briar has an interest in traditional remedies herself. She serves as our village healer." The irony nearly broke Lilith's carefully constructed composure. Thorn's daughter, following the path that had led her mother to the pyre. "Then I would be delighted," she said. As she packed away her goods for the day, the fox appeared briefly at the edge of the square, watching her with knowing eyes before slipping away between buildings. A reminder of her purpose, or a final warning. Lilith wasn't certain. The innkeeper showed her to a comfortable room where she refreshed herself before the evening meal. As darkness fell completely, she made her way to the elder's house, the same house where Thorn's father had lived, but expanded and improved. Dinner was an elegant affair by village standards. Thorn's 3 children were present. Rowan and Ash, his sons, both in their early 20s, and Briar, his daughter, perhaps 17. Thorn's wife, she learned, had died several years earlier from a wasting illness. Throughout the meal, Lilith maintained her role as the intriguing traveler, sharing carefully edited stories of her journeys, demonstrating just enough knowledge of herbs and remedies to impress without alarming. Briar, a serious girl with her father's eyes and a quietly determined manner, asked the most insightful questions. "Your methods are different from what I've been taught," the girl observed after Lilith described a treatment for winter cough. "Every region has its traditions," Lilith replied. "The fundamentals remain the same, understanding the body's needs and the plant's offerings." "My grandmother was a healer of some renown," Thorn interjected, his voice carefully neutral. She passed her knowledge to my wife, who began teaching Briar before her death. Not your mother? Lilith asked innocently. A brief silence fell over the table. No, Thorn said finally. My mother had other concerns. Rowan, the elder son who bore such a striking resemblance to his father, quickly changed the subject, asking about fashions in the southern provinces. The meal continued pleasantly, though Lilith noticed Thorn watching her with occasional thoughtful glances. As she prepared to return to the inn, he accompanied her to the door. How long will you stay in Hemlock Vale? He asked. I haven't decided, she answered truthfully. I find your village fascinating. Then I hope you'll stay through the midsummer celebration at least. It's our most significant festival. Midsummer is still many weeks away. Indeed, he said, his eyes warming. Perhaps by then you'll feel less like a visitor. Lilith allowed a small smile. Perhaps. As she walked back to the inn under the stars, she felt the first stirrings of doubt. Thorn seemed genuinely good, a respected leader, a loving father. The village clearly flourished under his care. For the briefest moment, she wondered what might have been had he made different choices 20 years ago. Then she remembered her mother's screams, and her resolve hardened once more. The next day, she sought out the first man on her mental list, Gareth Cooper, now the village blacksmith, who had been among those who dragged her mother from their cottage. His desire was evident from the moment he approached her stall, his eyes lingering on her face and form with unmistakable interest. It took only 3 days of casual conversations, subtle flirtation, and a strategically sold courage charm before he invited her to see a special project in his forge after the day's trading was done. In the privacy of the sweltering smithy, Lilith let her disguise thin just slightly, enough to enhance her allure beyond the merely human. Gareth never stood a chance. As her magic enveloped him, as her soft words described delights beyond imagining, he followed her willingly into the darkness behind the forge. What happened there would never be spoken of in Hemlock Vale, though rumors would later suggest animals had been involved, something wild from the forest, perhaps. The screams were brief, muffled by the ordinary sounds of the festival. By morning, the blacksmith had vanished, leaving only rust-colored stains that his apprentice scrubbed away with increasing unease. And so it began. Every few days, another man would disappear, always one who had been there on that fateful day 20 years earlier, always after a private encounter with the beautiful traveler who had by now established herself as a semi-permanent resident at the inn. Between these carefully orchestrated disappearances, Lilith continued her role as healer and merchant. She befriended Briar, teaching the girl remedies that her own mother had taught her, careful to keep to honest healing rather than magic. She exchanged pleasantries with the village women, though they never fully warmed to her. And increasingly, she spent time in Thorn's company, accepting invitations to dine, to walk the village perimeter, to discuss the settlement's needs. We haven't always been so prosperous, he told her during one such walk. When I was younger, we suffered a terrible winter of illness. Many children died. How tragic, Lilith said. How did the village recover? His expression darkened. With difficulty. There was unpleasantness, accusations. A young woman was blamed. Was she guilty? She kept her tone merely curious. I believed so at the time. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I was young, scared, and too concerned with my own position. And now? Now I know better. His voice grew heavy with something like regret. My father allowed fear to guide his judgment, and I was too weak to oppose him. It's a burden I've carried. For the first time in 20 years, Lilith felt her hatred waver. But beneath the veneer of the distinguished elder, she could still see the young man who had betrayed her, who had stood cold-faced as her mother burned. As disappearances mounted and weeks passed, tensions in the village grew. Women drew together in concerned groups, whispering about the stranger in their midst. Men continued to be drawn to Lilith despite the obvious danger, their judgment clouded not just by her beauty, but by the subtle magic she had introduced into the village well, a working that made them susceptible to her influence while heightening women's natural suspicions. Thorn held the village together, calming fears while organizing searches for the missing men. But Lilith could see the strain wearing on him, could sense his growing suspicion even as his attraction to her intensified. The confrontation came sooner than she had planned. After the disappearance of Rowan, his eldest son, his pride, Thorn appeared at her door in the inn, his face haggard, his eyes both grieving and coldly furious. "I know what you are," he said without preamble. Lilith stepped aside to let him enter. "Do you?" "I didn't see it at first." He paced her small room like a caged animal. "But there was always something familiar about you, something in your voice, your mannerisms. And then last night I dreamed of silver eyes, and I knew." She let her disguise fall away completely, revealing her true form, still beautiful but now obviously otherworldly, her silver eyes reflecting moonlight that wasn't present in the room, her black hair moving slightly as if underwater. "Lily," he whispered, the name a prayer and a curse in his mouth. "Lilith," she corrected. "Lily died the day you betrayed her." "What have you done with my son? With the others?" She smiled, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The same thing you did to my mother. I offered them as sacrifices to feed my power." He lunged toward her, but with a casual gesture, she froze him in place. Another motion had him seated in the room's single chair, bound by invisible forces. "You'll watch," she told him, her voice terrible in its gentleness. "As I was forced to watch. Every man who was in that square, every man who stood by while an innocent woman burned, they will feed my vengeance. And when I have consumed them all, your beloved village will wither like a garden without men to tend it. Kill me instead," he begged. "I'm the one who betrayed you." The others, they were following my father's lead. As were you. She leaned close, her hair brushing his face. "But death would be too merciful. You'll live to see everything you've built turn to dust." With a wave of her hand, she transformed him into a creature, neither fully human nor fully animal, still conscious, still recognizably Thorn, but unable to speak or move normally. She kept him hidden in her room, magically silenced and bound, forced to witness through conjured visions as she continued her campaign of seduction and destruction. Part 4. The Midsummer Reckoning. Midsummer approached. The village, now missing nearly a dozen men, prepared for its celebration with desperate determination, as if maintaining traditions could hold back the growing darkness. On the eve of the festival, Lilith completed her preparations for the final ritual. In her room, before the horrified eyes of the transformed Thorn, she arranged 13 black candles in a pattern corresponding to the stars above Hemlock Vale. Between them, she placed tokens taken from each of her victims, a lock of hair, a fingernail, a preserved eye. "Tonight," she told Thorn's misshapen form, "it ends." But when she returned from gathering herbs in the forest, Thorn's distorted body was gone. The binding spell had been broken, not by his efforts, but by someone with knowledge of protective magic. Briar. The girl had been asking increasingly specific questions about magical protections, disguising her inquiries as interest in medicinal herbs. Lilith had suspected she might know more than she revealed, but had underestimated the girl's determination and intelligence. It mattered little, she decided. She would proceed with her plan. If Thorn had been freed, he would be unable to convince the village of her true identity in time. She had seen to that. Subtle spells cast over weeks ensured that any accusations against her would be met with disbelief. As darkness fell, the midsummer fires were lit around the village square. Music played, though more subdued than at the harvest festival. Too many men were missing for true celebration. Lilith moved among the villagers in her full beauty, no longer bothering with disguise. Women drew back from her, clutching their children. Men stared with helpless longing. As the moon reached its zenith, she raised her arms toward the star-filled sky. From her lips came words in a language older than the village, older than human settlement in the valley. The fires around the square flared unnaturally high, their flames turning from orange to deep purple. "Come," she commanded, her voice carrying impossible distances. "Come to me, men of Hemlock Vale. Come and face judgment." The magic twisted through the village like smoke, entering homes, seeking out every male from youngest adult to oldest elder. Only boys too young for culpability were spared its call. They came shuffling into the square, their eyes blank, their movements mechanical. Women cried out, trying to hold back husbands and sons, but the compulsion was too strong. "No!" The cry came from the edge of the square. Briar stood there, supporting her father's weakened form. "This isn't justice." Lilith ignored her, focusing on the entranced men now forming a circle around her. With a gesture, she transported them all, herself, the enthralled men, and the watching Thorn and Briar, to the heart of the forest, to a clearing where ancient stones stood in a pattern mirroring the candles in her room. 20 years ago, she addressed the men, though they stared blankly, your village burned an innocent woman for the crime of healing. You accused her daughter of witchcraft. A bitter laugh escaped her. The irony is that neither of us was a witch then, but I became what you feared. She turned to face Thorn and Briar, who stood at the edge of the clearing. Your father knows the truth. Don't you, Thorn? Tell your daughter what kind of man you really are. His voice, when it came, was raw with emotion. I loved her, and I betrayed her because I was a coward. You were a boy, Briar said, her hand still supporting him, a frightened boy. A boy who sent a woman to her death, Lilith snarled. A boy who watched his lover's mother burn and did nothing. The enthralled men began to stir, the mention of the old tragedy penetrating their enchantment. Some of the older ones, those who had been present that day, showed recognition in their eyes. I offer you a choice, Lilith announced to them. Acknowledge your complicity in an unjust system. Drink this. She produced a flask of dark liquid, and forget this night, but live, or refuse and die as she died, feeding my power with your final breaths. She approached the first man, old Willem the baker, who had shouted accusations as her mother was tied to the stake. Choose. I remember her, he stammered, the enchantment weakening. The midwife, she delivered my grandchildren. And you called for her death, Lilith reminded him. Will you acknowledge your crime? It was wrong, he whispered. We were wrong. She offered the flask. He drank and immediately collapsed into unconsciousness, and so it continued around the circle. Some admitted wrongdoing and drank. Others, believing they could overpower her or unwilling to acknowledge injustice, refused. These she dispatched with terrible efficiency, not with fire, but with magic that drew their life force into herself, leaving them dried husks that crumbled to dust. With each death, the forest responded, trees twisting into grotesque shapes, flowers blooming blood-red in the darkness, animals gathering to watch with gleaming eyes. When only Thorn remained, Lilith approached him, the flask nearly empty. And you, she asked. What is your choice? I have already chosen, he said quietly, and from his pocket he withdrew a small vial, one of her own creations, sold weeks earlier as a sleeping aid, but capable of much more when consumed in its entirety. Before she could react, he swallowed the contents. No. Lilith and Briar cried in unison, but for different reasons. As Thorn collapsed, Briar caught him, easing him to the forest floor. Father. It's too late, Lilith said, her voice hollow. That potion in that quantity, there's no remedy. I know. Briar looked up, tears streaming down her face. He knew as well. He left a letter, a confession of everything that happened 20 years ago. He's carried that guilt his entire life. Lilith knelt beside the dying man, rage warring with grief in her breast. You deny me even my revenge? Thorn's eyes fluttered open, already glazing. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. Your mother? She didn't deserve, and you. Don't speak her name, Lilith hissed. You lost that right long ago? Grandmother knew, Briar said suddenly. Father's mother. She told me the truth before she died about the midwife and her daughter with the silver eyes. She taught me in secret, passing down what protective magic she knew. Your grandmother supported the execution, Lilith said flatly. Publicly, yes. But she knew it was wrong. She was as afraid as father was, but she tried to make amends in her own way. Briar touched her father's face as his breathing grew more labored. I've grown up hearing two stories, the village's tale of the witch who escaped justice, and my grandmother's account of an innocent healer and her daughter, wronged by fear and ignorance. Thorn's hand found Lilith's, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. Could you have loved me again? He asked, his voice barely audible. In another life? Before she could answer, the light faded from his eyes. His hand went slack in hers. The last connection to the girl she had been died with him. Around them, the men who had chosen to drink from the flask began to stir, their memories of the night already fading. The forest clearing, supernatural just moments before, gradually returned to normal as Lilith's emotions stabilized. Briar watched her warily. What now? Will you kill me too? No. Lilith stood, suddenly feeling every one of her years despite her ageless appearance. You're innocent of their crimes. As were you, once. The girl's direct gaze held challenge and wisdom beyond her years. Now that you've taken your revenge, has your pain lessened? Has your mother's spirit found peace? The question struck Lilith like a physical blow. She looked around at the unconscious men, at Thorn's still form, at the forest that had been her only companion for 20 years. The hollow feeling in her chest had not diminished. If anything, it had grown. Go, she told Briar. Take them back to the village. Tell them whatever story will bring them comfort. And you? I will return to the forest. It's the only home I have now. As dawn broke, Lilith watched from the hill as the men who survived staggered back to the village, their night's experiences already fading to a